Raiders, Romans, and countrymen, here we are again, another audio guide coming from your room 1206, Mr. David Swanson. If you're watching this video, it's probably because you weren't in class, you need to catch up. I wasn't in class, I'm teaching you the best way I know how. Or you're on the deep recesses of the internet, and hey, if you want to know about more about the civil rights movement, boy, do I ever have a story for you. So come on in and let's find out some more together. If you're in my class, you know you got your toolbox of notes and activities. Turn to the civil rights movement. There's some reading before, there's an activity after. Follow along, be it the attached PDF from your Google Classroom or the slides on the screen here. Ready, set, let's go. So your first vocab word is going to be domestic issues. We talked international issues go across the country's border. Well, domestic are going to be borders within the borders of the nation, or you could say at home. Okay, the word, you're probably most familiar with the phrase domestic violence. I don't want to know anyone's stories, but domestic violence means violence at home, domestic home. So domestic issues are going to be problems within the borders of a nation. The setup here is that once World War II ended and the Cold War period had begun, the United States also had some domestic issues that needed to be addressed. We've been talking about across the oceans, but we got to deal with at home as well. The nation needed to address the issues of soldiers returning home, re-entering the workforce. How could the country ensure that widespread unemployment did not cripple the nation once the war production of World War II was no longer the driving force in manufacturing? And also, super notably, segregation is another domestic issue that didn't fit in with the post-war emphasis on preserving freedoms for people around the world. How can we go fight for the freedom of others and then be seen as a segregationist nation at home? These are key issues that have a significant effect on the social changes in the United States following World War II. So one of the first major events in the civil rights movement is going to be, well, we've been dealing with segregation of the military. Let me change my screen there to the desegregation of the military. Happens in the year 1948. It is technically called Executive Order 9981. I know we've looked at some executive orders recently. You got to keep these numbers straight in your mind. Executive Order 9981 involves President Truman desegregating, or you could use the same word, integrating the U.S. military. This is a whole 17 years before the heart of the civil rights movement, the Civil Rights Act of 1964. A lot of times you do see the military leading the way with social change, and in this case, President Truman sponsors the executive order that does exactly that. You got the president shaking hands with an African-American man from the Air Force. You got the newspaper headline, President Truman wipes out segregation into armed forces. Obviously going to be celebrated by many. Unfortunately, there are some naysayers as well. A couple pictures here just to illustrate what once was. You had all African-American units. You had segregated units. We talked a little bit about the 54th Massachusetts Colored Regiment, led by white officers, where African-Americans, some of them freed slaves, some of them freed men who joined up and fought proudly for Massachusetts at a couple of key battles. And the movie Glory kind of gives us their story. You got the Tuskegee Airmen, unit of all African-American pilots. So showing abilities, okay? The African-American man is no different than any other man in his ability to learn, hey, we can be pilots too. They didn't actually get to do any frontline combat during the war, but they did a lot of escort missions and reconnaissance missions. And there's a great paragraph about that in your toolbox. You got all African-American Marines, but unfortunately, you still have the segregation in the facilities, such as the showers. White officers, colored officers, white enlisted, color enlisted, drinking fountains, restaurants, buses, etc. So unfortunately, the segregation still existed up to this executive order. But the first time we're going to see the desegregation of the military in combat is in the Korean War. So beautiful picture of what the military ought to be. There's a saying, there's no atheists in the foxhole. Everybody finds religion. Well, your color doesn't really matter in the foxhole either. You only care about what the man next to you can do in terms of his fighting ability. So great picture here of a machine gun crew being desegregated, 2 black men, 2 white men. And hey, the only thing that matters is the direction that muzzle is pointing towards the enemy. So I'll tell you my experiences in the military. Obviously, I've grown up in a desegregated military. There's a phrase we often say that, there's a phrase often said, we're all green in the Army. Color green being the uniform or the dominant color of the Army, green. We are all green in the Army. Top left, that's a unit I led in Afghanistan. We were a desegregated, or we were a multinational integrated section from the unit I was in at the time. Top right, that's the superintendent of the United States Military Academy, West Point, 3-star General Williams. And I got to meet him one time, and we're kind of showing off our class rings together. Two younger enlisted men who I've served with as well. Lower left, that is the man who taught me to jump out of airplanes, Sergeant Morse, and he is pinning my airborne wings on me. And then lower right, this is my friend Sergeant Brown from the National Guard. Sergeant Brown is actually a teacher as well. And we always connect over telling stories about on drill. It's like, hey, you got your Google Classroom set up? How your kids doing? He's a math teacher. So when I leave you guys, I can just still make videos to tell the stories. I really can't imagine leaving a math class and kind of losing out on teaching the processes. So appreciate his service and his teaching as well. Sergeant D. Brown. Obviously, I've grown up in a desegregated military. Thank you, President Harry Truman. This is one of the first actions that will lead us into the civil rights movement. Just a couple more pictures there. General from Oklahoma National Guard and West Point classmates as well, to include my roommate, Mr. Adepegba, and friends. So and then this is the platoon I took to Afghanistan. You can see that we are an integrated platoon. Remember, we're all green in the Army. That is the only color that matters. Great example here of two men at the heights of their careers, General Schwarzkopf and General Colin Powell, both of them 4-star generals. General Powell was actually a general for 20 years. From the time he got his first star to his retirement with 4 stars, he was a general longer than most people make a career of the military. He's a general itself for more than 20 years. Pretty remarkable. He goes on to be George W. Bush's Secretary of State. And I got to meet him in 2006. I had my appointment to the academy. I was headed towards the military. Got to meet him at a speaking event, shake his hand, tell him where I was headed. And he patted me on the back, said congratulations. And this is a picture of it. Grainy picture, unfortunately, is the best picture I have from the time frame. Well, in 1998, on the 50th anniversary of the executive order, Colin Powell says this. I'll just let his words speak for themselves. The military was the only institution in all of America, because of Harry Truman, where a young black kid, now 21 years old, could dream the dream he dared not think of at age 11. It was the one place where the only thing that counted was courage, where the color of your guts and the color of your blood was more important than the color of your skin. I think that says it pretty well. Thank you, General, for sharing that perspective. So the executive order kind of leading us into what is the civil rights movement. So what is the civil rights movement? A movement that started in the 1960s, people fighting for racial and gender equality. Let's not miss the fact, very often the color battle is brought to the forefront. Martin Luther King Jr. leading for African Americans, rights, equality, voting, pay, integration into the workforce, etc. Let's not forget that gender equality is a piece of the movement as well. And when we speak of civil rights, we are simply talking about liberty and justice for all, equality for all men, created equal. Some of these phrases from our founding documents that, well, quite frankly, it's been a while since we've been able to really live up to those ideals. Let's remember where we came from. The Jim Crow era. So we've already talked about this. We've already seen some of these pictures. Jim Crow era began after Reconstruction. It was when a variety of state and local laws enforced racial segregation in the South. But was it legal? Well, we see these expressed through black codes, a literacy test. In order to vote, you have to pass a literacy test, or a poll tax. In order to vote, you have to pay. A lot of African Americans, uneducated, undereducated, couldn't pass the literacy test. A lot of recently freed slaves, now embroiled in sharecropping, couldn't pay the poll tax. So these were informal ways to keep the African American from expressing his full enfranchisement, from voting, owning property, and being free. Like, why do we fight the war if we're going to keep them down? Groups like the KKK continue to do so. Was this legal? Right? States are doing this. Was this legal? Well, we get ourselves the landmark Supreme Court case Plessy versus Ferguson, the year 1896, where the Supreme Court does uphold the principle of separate but equal. The Supreme Court affirms the idea of segregation. Yes, it's legal. Year 1896. One of our lower points in U.S. history. But wait, we are about to turn the corner. I've always called that PFSE. Plessy Ferguson gives us separate but equal, and the iconic cartoon that comes from that as well. A couple of pictures here just to illustrate life in segregation. It's a family drinking at a colored drinking fountain in Alabama. Well dressed. I don't know their job. I don't know the occupation, but we got mom, dad, 3 girls. There's a white water fountain right next to the colored one. There's no reason that they shouldn't be able to use that one, but because of the color of their skin, they were limited on the facilities they could use. This photo shows a segregated Dairy Queen in Alabama. You have a white window for ordering. You have a colored color window for ordering. Did you know Dairy Queen used to be walk up only, not the sit down dining room version that I know we all experience in Alma here today? And this one, of course, unfortunately segregated in the year 1956. This picture here, a department store in Mobile, Alabama, 1956. And we see a well-dressed African-American family. I don't know, are they coming from church? Are they dressed like that all the time? What is their income bracket? I don't know that exactly. But because of the color of their skin, they would have to use the so-called colored entrance. If you were wondering if this was real, let these pictures show you that, in fact, this was very real. Demonstrators picket over a lunch counter segregation. This is in 1960. So you got a man wearing a sign that says, "The presence of segregation is the absence of democracy. Jim Crow must go." As long as one person or person group is segregated in America, are we a democracy? He says no. I say no. Later, the Supreme Court will say no. Jim Crow must go. Black citizens sit in the rear of the bus in compliance with the South Carolina segregation law. This is in 1956. So eventually Rosa Parks is going to say, nah, enough of that. And she's going to give us a case that leads to decisions and a change. Here we have children being used, I would say, as props in the conversation here. A 7-year-old child in a Ku Klux Klansman robe participates in a KKK rally, 1956. Southern whites are the Negroes' best friends, but no integration. Do we think that this 7-year-old has the mental faculties or maturity or ability to arrive at that conclusion by himself, to arrive at the idea that segregation is what's right? I'll tell you this, my kid at 7 just hates naps. Okay, go down for a nap. No, like my kid doesn't hate people. My kid hates naps. So I would suggest that a 7-year-old can't arrive at that conclusion by himself. He is socialized into that conclusion by his parents. And of course, you can see that his parents have dressed him in this fashion as well. The punchline here, when I say punchline as a sad thing, the sad idea here is that Southern whites are trying to build themselves up as the Negro's best friend. We will take care of our housemaids. We will take care of our Black employees. But no integration. No, that's too much. So I just kind of let you think about that. I bet this young man, let's see, 1956, what is that? 60 plus years ago, never do math in public. I bet this guy's not too proud of this picture. I bet he doesn't advertise this picture in his social media presence today, if he has one. Next picture here. Klansmen form a circle around a burning cross at a rally in Albany, Georgia, which an estimated 3,000 persons attended in 1962. A lot of times these events were used as intimidation, even if they weren't directly attacking, incarcerating, lynching any individual person. A lot of times these rallies were used as intimidation to prevent African Americans from going to vote. Maybe the voting was happening the next day, or election day is coming up. Don't go vote, or else this could happen, in your front yard to your family. So a lot of times these rallies were used as intimidation. A teacher instructs at a segregated school of a class of Black students at a poorly funded one-room schoolhouse in the backwoods of Georgia in 1941. If I didn't have a label here, I would guess this was like 1880, but this is 1941. When we have indoor structures, air conditioning, carpet, glass windows, we should have a better facility, but this was the poorly funded one-room school given to the African-American side of the community, separate but not equal. Separate but not equal. Black classroom, Shady Grove, Alabama, 1956. You see the similarities. Well, what are we going to do about that? Brown versus the Board of Education, a very landmark Supreme Court case. We don't have to memorize a lot of Supreme Court cases in this class, but this is certainly one of them. The 1954 Supreme Court decision where the NAACP lawyer Thurgood Marshall leads the defense. He is a future Supreme Court justice, and the ultimate The conclusion of this case is that it overturns Plessy versus Ferguson and ends segregated schools. So the story is this: little Linda Brown in Topeka, Kansas. She lived close to a white school, but she had to travel much further to her segregated school, where her family sues for the idea that she should be able to go to the school closest to her, which was a whites-only school. So a lot of times landmark cases are what change things in our government. And Thurgood Marshall and the NAACP, you remember the NAACP is very involved in activism and bringing about changes through the court system. The NAACP grabs her case and says, we're going to continue this lawsuit until we get a resolution. So Brown claims, Linda Brown and her family claim that schools for black children were not equal to the white schools, and that this segregation essentially violated the 14th Amendment, which holds that all citizens have equality, that no state can deny any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws. So they're really taking, we've talked about this before, 13, 14, 15, free citizens vote. She's saying that her citizenship itself is not being upheld because she does not have access to equal protection under the law, essentially saying separate but equal is unconstitutional. Well, the NAACP takes up her case. Separate but equal is argued to be inherently unfair, and the Supreme Court rules that schools must desegregate with all deliberate speed. Problem with the ruling is that they didn't put a timetable on it. You must desegregate. We uphold her claim that she is being treated unfairly, that citizens must have equal rights and not separate facilities. But unfortunately, the phrase used was with all deliberate speed. So you have some schools that desegregate immediately, rapidly, and immediately. You got a lot of schools in the South that drag their feet and don't desegregate immediately, or they change their school district line so that one black family is included now in this school, and that one student is now in the white school, and it is desegregated. So a lot of resistance to the ruling as well. Great cartoon here, just really summarizes the two big cases you got to know. 1896, Plessy versus Ferguson gets overturned in 1954 by Brown versus Board. That is the conclusion. That is the connection between these two cases, and that is the end of Plessy versus Ferguson, and another step closer to full civil rights for African Americans. What is the reaction? Well, first of all, the picture you have here, this is Linda Brown's mother and little Linda Brown sitting on the steps of the Supreme Court. The newspaper says, High Court bans segregation in public schools. You got to imagine, Mom was real proud of this moment, but she's probably also aware that it's just beginning. Okay, the response is just beginning. Their lives aren't going to get easier, but if they've been strong to this point, okay, they fought to the Supreme Court and won, they're going to have resolve to continue forward as well. And then little Linda Brown, she's just a child in the middle of the story, but she's the one that actually has to go to an integrated school, be brave, be strong, and make a difference as well. So what is the overall reaction? Well, various forms of resistance across the South. There's this concept called white flight from public schools to private schools. A lot of white Americans said, okay, fine, we don't want to go to an integrated public school. We're going to start a private school. A lot of, I say this carefully, and it's just a fact. I'll bring you the facts. A lot of private Christian schools started during this time because they could set a price point. They could determine who will be admitted and who will not. A lot of Christian schools to this day have their legacy, have their, they were created during this time frame, 1954, 55, 56, because of white flight from public schools. Okay, we just won't go to a public school anymore. We'll create our own private school where we can choose who we want to have in our schools in the first place. And then there's incidences with integration and the desegregation process, very notably in Little Rock, Arkansas, where the president had to get involved. He had to federalize troops from the Arkansas National Guard in order to help safely integrate a public school. So some negative situations amidst the positive is the case saying that separate but equal is unconstitutional. The negative is the reaction and responses to it thereafter. Some more pictures here. So women and teenagers at an elementary school yell at police officers during a protest against the desegregation of the pool as 3 African-American children attended classes on the second day of school. 1960. The sign on the far right reads, "All I want for Christmas is a clean, white school." Wow. If I didn't see it with my own eyes, it'd be hard to just read it. But you know what they say, a picture's worth a thousand words. I don't have to add anything to that at all. Picture here, an unruly mob protesting the integration of a high school attacks a car full of black people who just happened to be passing through August of 1956. Just driving down the road, attacked by a mob, angry over this Supreme Court ruling, angry over the fact that their school is now being integrated. Picture's worth a thousand words. I don't have to say anything else. Individual students at Clinton High School in Clinton, Tennessee picket their school when it becomes the first state-supported school to integrate, August of 1956. So again, the response, the reaction, very, very hard for some of these first integrations. Strike against integration. We won't go to school with Negroes. We, the pupils of Clinton High School, don't want Negroes in our school. A little bit of a play on we the people. Well, he's saying we the pupils, trying to invoke the Constitution. I would suggest he needs to read the Constitution because he's not getting that part of it right. I mentioned integration in Little Rock, Arkansas. So that gives us, the Little Rock High School gives us the Little Rock Nine, and I'll briefly tell you their story. What we see here, we see hateful screaming, opposition to the integration. So the problem with our case is that in the verdict, the Supreme Court did not specify exactly how schools should be integrated. So what you got here are the first 9 individuals selected to integrate Little Rock High School. Based off of redistricting and drawing the map for the school district, these 9 individuals were going to be the first to go to Little Rock High School. And this is the response that they received on their first day in class. Although the court was well-intentioned, the court's actions essentially opened the door to local judicial and political evasions to desegregation. Some states acted in accordance with the verdict, most notably Kansas, where the Board of Education, Brown versus the Board of Education of Topeka, Kansas, they integrated, but many other school and local officials in the South defied it. Very notably, one major example in Arkansas, the governor calls out the State National Guard to prevent black students from attending the high school in 1957. But after a tense standoff, President Eisenhower deployed federal troops. He actually deployed the 101st Airborne Division, the same guys we talked about in Band of Brothers, to protect these individuals entering the building. So you got really, I'm not going to get into it, but you got a really unique standoff between the governor ordering his National Guard to do one thing, and then the president federalizing those troops. You don't work for the governor anymore, you work for me, and sending in more troops to ensure the desegregation of the high school. So that is sometimes a complication that a National Guardsman has to go through. Who's my boss today? Well, these individuals are known as the Little Rock Nine. They're able to enter Central High School under armed guard. And there they are. You can see that this is America. You don't expect, soldiers having to escort students into school for their own safety. This was America in the late 1950s and the protests that they continued to encounter. You see that later in the year 1992, President Clinton honors the Arkansas Nine. Clinton was from Arkansas himself, so that makes sense that he wants to honor some people from his state. And Clinton was a friend of minorities, friend of African Americans, so that's pretty on brand for him, honoring the Little Rock Nine. Obviously, 30 plus years later, 1992, our country has a different attitude towards civil rights, and we can see the groundbreakers that they were, the trailblazers that they were, and the response is very, very different around the country. So that's a little side pull out, the Little Rock Nine. You have an activity in your toolbox about the Little Rock Nine. Let's look at some faces of the movement, leaders of the movement. Some you're going to be very familiar with, and others you might not know quite as much about. So let's jump to it. First of all, face of the franchise here. Obviously, the face of the movement is Martin Luther King Jr., important character in the story of us, a very influential leader of the civil rights movement. Make sure you write down what's in green. His strategy was nonviolence. So he's going to be known for nonviolence. All the times he could have reacted with a punch, or he could have fought back, struck back. He got struck, but in his understanding of leadership, and he was actually a Baptist preacher, he would understand the phrase "turn the other cheek." So when he got struck, he would react with nonviolence. He says our movement has to be hinged on nonviolent resistance. He's going to be known for two big things: the "I Have a Dream" speech and the letter from Birmingham essay. So we'll talk about each of those. And then ultimately, he was assassinated by a white supremacist. I don't even like to say the guy's name. I don't even think it should be remembered. His name is James Earl Ray. He's really assassinated by hate. He was assassinated by those who hated what he stood for. Kind of back to his nonviolent resistance, he gets this from certainly the Bible, but also Gandhi. Mahatma Gandhi was another civil rights leader in India, known for his nonviolent response to resistance, nonviolent resistance. So Martin Luther King Jr. kind of modeling after Mahatma Gandhi and bringing that idea to America. Here you got Martin Luther King Jr. next to the president. So he was known to, he did interact with President Johnson, and that's going to be ultimately influential in the actual passage of the Civil Rights Act. He's a Baptist minister from Atlanta. So we got a lot of Georgia history with Martin Luther King Jr. He is coordinated the nonviolent resistance. He got to start with the Montgomery bus boycott, which briefly to just say that the idea was that, hey, we're going to not ride the bus. African Americans, the bus system needs us more than we need the bus. They need our dollar every day. They need us to pay the fare for the buses to keep running. So as inconvenient as it may be, we're going to walk to work. We're going to walk to work till they integrate the buses. We ain't sitting in the back anymore. We're going to walk to work. We're going to save our dollar, and those buses are going to pay attention to us eventually. So after weeks of this, the Montgomery bus system did integrate. So first little success there. He also wins the Nobel Peace Prize. He is the youngest to do that. A couple pictures here of the man in jail. He did not choose an easy path. His resistance did not lead to a cushy life. He was not, living in a mansion and dining out, living some celebrity lifestyle. His actions, famous though he is in our era, his actions led to a lot of hardship for him, to include being arrested many times. Here's another booking photo here. Show you one more kind of picture of the time. So counter protests against the civil rights movements. King would lead his people in favor of civil rights, and every time he's leading a movement in favor of civil rights, you're going to have counter protests against civil rights. Well, you got some members here of what's called the National States Party hanging an effigy. That means a likeness of him. So hanging, and sometimes they would burn the effigy as well. In a demonstration in 1963. What I really want you to see here is what's behind him. It's not in color. Peer into it. Can you see the red, the blue, the white? No, I'm not talking about the American flag. I'm talking about the Confederate battle flag. This era gives rise to using the Confederate battle flag as a white supremacist symbol. And quite frankly, that carries into the present day as well. So I would challenge each of you. We've already talked about Civil War. We've already talked about what the Confederates were. We've already talked about symbology. I would challenge you to recognize what the Confederate flag stands for in 1963 and what it stands for today, and challenge you to wonder if we should still use it in any fashion at all. Spoiler alert, my opinion is no. I can't tell you what to think. I can only challenge you to think it for yourself. So you look at that picture and you decide what the Confederate battle flag stands for, and you decide if you want to keep using it, wearing it in the world today. Martin Luther King Jr. states this: darkness cannot drive out darkness, only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate, only love can do that. Non-violent protest. Major thing we need to know about him is his letter from the Birmingham jail essay. It is a letter written to Alabama clergy. Alabama clergy at the time were telling King just to chill out. Stop coming to our town. Stop getting arrested. You are not helping the process. Just wait. Well, King's response defends the use of the nonviolence protests. And his response, this letter essay, really becomes a key document in the civil rights movement. And so in it, he says this. I'm going to read just a little bit from it. King also criticized clergy for urging patience in light of the continued violence. He states this: for years now, I've heard the word wait. It rings in the ear of every Negro with piercing familiarity. This wait has always meant never. We must come to see with one of our distinguished jurists that justice too long delayed is justice denied. I'm done waiting. I will get arrested. I will shake things up. You know how you make an omelet? You got to scramble some eggs. I will make a mess until we have a conclusion to that which we are seeking. My friends, I must say to you that we have never made a single gain in civil rights without determined legal and nonviolent pressure. This is the whole letter right here. I'm not going to read it, but it's not a 10,000 page essay. It's not some massive dictionary of a book. It's just, what is that, 7 paragraphs, 8 paragraphs there. Very foundational document to the civil rights movement. A lot of times an ELA class does read this, dissect it for its persuasive appeals, persuasive methods. I would challenge you maybe take a second to read it. I'm not going to do it in class on this video here, but I would challenge you to take a second to read it and see what you think for yourself. Final statement from his letter from a Birmingham jail. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied into a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. He's talking to white people too. He says an injustice to one people group, guess what? They could come for you next, is an injustice to all people groups. Until we have equality, whatever affects one affects all as well. Rosa Parks, often called the first lady of the civil rights movement. She is going to be very invested in the Montgomery bus boycott. She's a member of the NAACP. She's called the first lady of the civil rights movement. Of course, her story is that she sits at the front of the bus, is told to move to the back, and decides that on that day the answer is no. Well, she was actually specially selected for this mission, if you will, give it a military word, and she knew she was going to be arrested. She was ready to be arrested. The pictures being taken, the NAACP knew that these pictures were going to have an impact. Her story was going to have an impact, and they were going to take her court case to the highest of levels to demand the desegregation of busing, first in Alabama, but then throughout the country as well. So Rosa Parks did what she did, refused to move to the back of the bus. A lot of times the quote is nah, Rosa Parks, move to the back of the bus. Nah, had enough today. First lady of the civil rights movement, someone students are usually familiar with. Here's one you are maybe less familiar with, Malcolm X. Malcolm X, that is not his given name. He changes his name. He's a fierce advocate for African Americans. He's very different than Martin Luther King Jr., though. He disagrees with the nonviolent strategy. He says, we're going to have to make some noise if we want to be heard. His quote is, what do we gain from nonviolence? So he's a little bit more radical, a little bit more aggressive, seeking the same results through a different method. He is assassinated by the Nation of Islam in 1965. That is not to say a Muslim country. It's a religious sect inside the United States known as the Nation of Islam. He actually was a member of the Nation of Islam. He left them, and in leaving them, he found himself on their bad side, and they assassinated him in the year 1965. A lot of times the phrase violence begets violence. He lived an aggressive, violent life, and he died an aggressive, violent death. Next character in our cast of characters is Robert F. Kennedy. Well, what do you notice about him? You have to notice he's a white guy. Civil rights, the movement was not just African Americans seeking African American rights. It was humans seeking equality for all. So yes, you get men and women, blacks and whites, who are civil rights activists, and Robert F. Kennedy is one of those. A lot of times known as RFK. He's the brother to President JFK. He's the brother to John F. Kennedy. He is the U.S. Attorney General, and he is a friend of those in the civil rights movement. He helps protect freedom riders, those who ride buses, to make the statement that I am allowed to ride the bus. He supports desegregation, first as a senator from New York and then as the U.S. Attorney General. He's got a quote here, pretty powerful. Well, he is let me say it like this. He's the leading Democratic candidate for president in the year 1968. I told you, hang on to 1968. We're going to look at several foundational events. One of them is this. He was assassinated, shot, while campaigning in California in June of 1968. So unfortunately, he is the front runner. It seems as if he'll be the Democrat candidate and then seemingly the choice of the nation to be the next president. Well, he's assassinated by an Islamic extremist, not for his support of African American rights, but for his support of Israel. He's assassinated by a man named Sirhan Sirhan. He's shot in the basement of a hotel kitchen, and he dies while campaigning to be the president. And quite frankly, that changes the presidential race. We'll look at that a little bit more closely in a future class. Focus on him as a civil rights activist right now. Powerful quote. He says, each time a man stands up for the ideal or acts to improve the lot of others or strikes out against injustice, he sounds out a tiny ripple of hope. A ripple in a pond. Like if I throw one little rock, it's going to make a bloop. There's going to be a ring, and that ring is going to go outward, 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 making waves, possibly stretching all the way across the pond. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. says a single act of kindness every time a man stands up for right is a ripple of good in the world. Be that kind of person. Look at a couple challenges to the civil rights movement. So we already see that this is Elizabeth Eckford attending to integrate Little Rock High School. We already know that the military comes out to help her out. I look at the gal right off of her right shoulder, screaming, and I just got to feel she's not very proud of this picture. Actually, I know that for a fact because the woman on the far right side there, she later reconnected and apologized to Elizabeth Eckford. She blamed her upbringing and her parents. So she kind of later came to terms with the idea that she did not have the right attitude on that day in that moment. She was filled with hate. She changed later in life. I think that's a very important piece of the whole story here is that change is possible. Politicians who voted against civil rights can change. People like the screaming woman here who were raised one way can change. The 7-year-old boy dressed in KKK attire can change, and many have. Many who originally opposed civil rights later change their attitude. This, what's going on here, this is called a sit-in. So in restaurants where colored had to sit elsewhere from white, a lot of times young activists would go and sit at the counter, some black, some white, those in favor of civil rights would sit at the counter and just refuse to move until they were served. Like, we are going to sit here, we are humans, you are going to serve us. Well, the counter protest to that was sometimes the mob mentality would lead other youths or just people in opposition to dump food, water, drink, ketchup on them. So in keeping with nonviolent protest, the civil rights activists just sat there and took it. Now you got to ask yourself, would you do that? And I can imagine some of you are like, no way, I'd turn up and swing back. I'd take that ketchup and put it in their face. And I get that. Part of their method here was nonviolent response. Let the world see what they're doing to us. Photography makes a big difference in the civil rights movement when everybody can see what's happening to these people in the South. And the nonviolent protest was very important. So hard as it must have been to sit there and have things poured on you in that fashion, it is something that where they maintain their composure and nonviolent protest. This is called busing. So the Freedom Riders were actually Northerners who would ride to the South in order to participate in civil rights activism. Unfortunately, sometimes they were met at the county line or at the state line, Alabama, South Carolina, Georgia, whatever. And the bus is attacked. You can see the lower left there, that lower right, the bus was burned to a crisp. So even being a Freedom Rider carried a lot of danger. And this is an example where RFK was in favor of the Freedom Riders. As Attorney General, he said they absolutely have the right to do that. You can start in the North. You can cross state lines. You can go and protest in the South. If you're an American, you have the right to free speech. And, of course, he was in favor of civil rights as well. So he supported the Freedom Riders. Pretty iconic photo here showing the use of a fire hose against nonviolent protesters. So, again, they're holding their composure. They are nonviolent, and they're being met with aggression. Another example of the same, a nonviolent civil rights protester is attacked by a police dog. Through it all, he kept his composure. People being sprayed with the fire hoses, they kept their composure. Nonviolence was a hallmark of the civil rights protest. And this picture here, this is actually in Boston. So protests were not exclusive to the South. And the picture here, this actually wins a prize. This picture wins an award for being such a powerful photo. Called The Soiling of Old Glory. And you have a white activist using the flag and the flagpole as a weapon, essentially using it as a weapon against the African-American there. And wild thing is that the African-American man there, he's a civil rights lawyer. He is an attorney. Okay, he is educated. He has passed the bar. He has a job. And the man holding the flag is just a college student. So you want to talk about who's accomplished more in life? The African-American man has accomplished far more in life. Why is this, college student belittling him, much less using the flag to do so? Powerful photo there. So some challenges. Let's round it out here with some events. What actually brings about change. 1963, the March on Washington, D.C., led by Martin Luther King Jr., hallmarked by his I Have a Dream speech, builds huge support for civil rights legislation and shows the power of nonviolent protest. So variety of pictures here, and I'm going to link a video. I'd love for you to actually watch the speech and kind of live the history for yourself. Move to this picture right here. Nope, not that picture right there. Next picture, you know what? I'm gonna do this. Move to this picture right here because it's in color. Looking at the crowd, looking at that crowd right there, and who do you see? Like, what do you see? A lot of times students say it's sunny. They're wearing sunglasses. Yes, they had to deal with the heat of the day, August in Washington, D.C. They're well dressed. Yep, it's kind of normal for the day. People would wear a shirt and a tie, a button up, even a jacket, a full brimmed hat. You know, they didn't wear athletic wear or tank tops. But what I really hope that you see is that in the crowd, you got men and women, you got blacks and whites, you got people who are in favor of civil rights. Doesn't matter. Red and yellow, black and white, they're precious in His sight. People of all race, colors, and creeds gathered to speak for equality, for civil rights. On this day, Martin Luther King Jr. gives his very famous "I Have a Dream" speech. Okay, he was a master at using language, a master at the tone and pace of his delivery, and this becomes known as the "I Have a Dream" speech. In it, he appeals for peace, racial equality. He has the dream. The dream he has is an America where everybody is equal, from sea to shining sea, from north to south, that children of all ages can grow up in peace and harmony. I have a dream that my children one day will be judged by the content of their character, not the color of their skin. I have a dream. Please watch the video, catch what his dream is, and see how this speech was so powerful at the time. Unfortunately, not a single speech can fix it all, and violence does still continue. You may remember, catch a little flashback here, in the 40s, pre-World War II, A. Philip Randolph threatens a million-man march in Washington, D.C. if the workforce is not integrated, the defense industry is not integrated. Franklin Roosevelt meets with A. Philip Randolph, integrates the defense work, the Equal Employment Act, Fair Employment Act, and the march doesn't happen. Well, plus 20 years, you got Martin Luther King Jr. kind of leading through A. Philip Randolph's vision, and you do have a million-person march. You call it a million-man march, but a million people marching in Washington, D.C. for civil rights. This picture is super powerful. You can see the mall. You know, we just did the virtual reality in class. You took a tour of Washington, D.C., and you saw the Washington Monument. Right behind it is the Capitol building, and you have a million people in between, all listening to the messages of the day. Variety of speakers, singers, preachers. The message was all for civil rights, and the hallmark was the speech by Martin Luther King Jr. Got this last picture right here. This actually comes from my friend Aldo. My friend Aldo is an Army friend. He's retired out of the Army at this point. He took his kids to Washington, D.C. And what they're doing here, he posted this on his Facebook, and I asked if I had permission to use it. He said yes. What they're doing here is they are watching Martin Luther King Jr.'s "I Have a Dream" speech on his phone in the exact same location that he delivered it, with the exact same view that he had. Look at this. I'll go back and forth. The exact same view that he had on that day. It gives me chill bumps to think about something I want to do with my kids the next time I go to Washington, D.C. Watch Martin Luther King Jr.'s speech. And in the palm of my hands, what a day we live in, technology. The palm of my hands, I can watch the speech that changed the movement from the exact location where it happened. That's pretty cool. Well, what are the results? So the results of the movement, the march, the speech, the essays, the writings, the nonviolence, Civil Rights Act of 1964. It's introduced by President JFK, but unfortunately, he never sees it to completion. When he's assassinated, he doesn't see it come to the end. So introduced by JFK, but actually passed by Johnson. And a lot of times Johnson gets credit for having it passed. Johnson signs it, puts his name on it. And in a way that the Democrat presidents really wanted to bring in African-American voters to the Democrat Party for decades to come. And they were successful in doing that. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. What does it do? It prohibits discrimination based on race, religion, ethnicity, or gender. A lot of what we focused on was African-American rights. Martin Luther King Jr. is the face of the African-American movement, but the Civil Rights Act extended to even more: race, religion, ethnicity, or gender. And very concretely, what does it accomplish? It outlaws segregation in public facilities. Previously, we had segregation outlawed in public schools. Now we have segregation outlawed in all other public facilities as much as the government can control. So private facility, your own home, that's your own issues, but public facilities, no more segregation allowed. Leads to, so 64 Civil Rights Act, but unfortunately there are still some issues with voting. So 1 year later, we make that a little bit more official, a little bit more concrete. I mean, you would think free citizens vote, you would think the 15th Amendment had this figured out, but unfortunately states and municipalities were finding ways to get around the 15th Amendment. So the Voting Rights Act of 1965 officially outlaws literacy tests and poll taxes for voting, and thus increases African-American voters immediately and henceforth into the future. Picture you see here again, more than 300,000 Negroes are denied the right to vote in Alabama. And of course, the counter protester, what's he holding? He's holding that terrible Confederate battle flag to try to make his point. And I hope that you will cease caring about the Confederate battle flag in a similar manner because of what it stands for and represents. The Civil Voting Rights Act of 1965. There we go. We have a conclusion to the movement. Some of you world historians, I hope that you will remember that, Martin Luther King Jr., his namesake, Martin Luther, was the original Protestant reformer. Protestant as a denomination, it's got a root word for protest. Reformation, root word reform. These are some Baptist ministers. Center of the pack there is, of course, Martin Luther King Jr. They're marching in Georgia right here, and they are the heart of protest and reform. This is an in-service day, and I'm still getting interrupted with announcements. Always recommending movies to you. Selma, story of Martin Luther King Jr., and not exactly a little bit off the beaten path for U.S. history, but the movie Remember the Titans is desegregation in action. It's integration in a high school in action when you see this law take place in Virginia and you see a high school have to integrate for the first time. And what you see expressed through football really is U.S. history that we've just been talking about. All right, final thought here on your notes, backside of your notes, a little check on learning, 3 questions for you to answer. This gentleman has a sign that says, I am a man. Does he need another law to prove that? I am a man, a citizen. I'm free. I'm a citizen. I have the right to vote. I am a man. So what do you think is the meaning of this man's poster? What is an example of a civil rights movement where people were not treated like a man, like men? And do you feel that this poster and the variety of other posters I showed across these 45 minutes were effective? What do you think? Hey, thank you for your time and attention. Like always, thank you for listening. I'm sure you dive into your study guide, dive into your toolbox, answer all the questions, all the reflection questions, and the one activity about the Little Rock 9. I hope you learned something that you didn't know when you woke up today, and that you're a better American for it. From Room 1206, Mr. Swanson, signing off.